Magnus Carlsen is one of the best chess players of all time, who became the world champion after defeating Viswanathan Anand in 2013, being the #1 player for more than 10 years, while achieving a peak rating of 2,882. Almost nobody could defeat Magnus Carlsen at his peak. He had played 125 consecutive chess matches without losing a single one. But what happens when Magnus Carlsen faces an extremely strong chess grandmaster and 5-time US chess champion? This is Hikaru Nakamura, one of the fastest, deadliest, and most accurate players of all time, having defeated almost every player on the globe, and with multiple tournaments under his belt, Hikaru has established himself as a force to be reckoned with. Upon starting the game, Magnus moves his pawn to c4, to which Hikaru thinks for a while before responding with d5. After developing their starting pieces, both players have a pretty identical position, with Magnus's knights on c3 and f3, and Hikaru's knights on c6 and f6. Magnus slides his pawn to d3, creating a pawn chain. Hikaru here realizes that he needs to create an imbalance in the position if he wants to find a way to beat Magnus. So he moves his pawn to d5, striking the center. Magnus captures this pawn and Hikaru captures it back with his knight. Magnus moves his pawn to e4, attacking the knight, so instead of retreating his knight, Hikaru jumps into f4. This makes Magnus think for a long time before trading Hikaru's knight with his bishop, and then playing pawn d4, gaining center control. After a couple of developing moves, Hikaru castled his king to safety, not knowing this move is the beginning of his worst nightmare. Magnus started this nightmare by setting an X-ray over the king with his bishop, which made Hikaru think for minutes before moving his king to h8. Magnus slides his pawn to e5, forcing Hikaru to retreat his bishop. Again, Magnus slides his pawn to d5, attacking the knight. Hikaru was aware that this light square bishop on a diagonal is very active, so Hikaru hops in with his knight to a5, attacking the undefended bishop on c4 and forcing Magnus to retreat back to a2. After a few moves, Hikaru jumps in with his knight, blocking the light squared bishop and offering a knight trade, which Magnus instantly goes for. Then, Magnus slides his queen to d4, allowing him to capture 2 pawns on 4th rank. Hikaru seizes the opportunity to attack the undefended knight by sliding his rook to c8. This move forces Magnus to retreat his knight. Both players start maneuvering their pieces. Magnus slides his rook to c1, offering a rook trade, and Hikaru slides his rook to c4. After a few moves, they traded off their rooks. And this is where the fun began. Hikaru decides to trade his bishop for the knight, which allows him to capture the undefended pawn on e6 with his rook. After a couple more moves, Magnus launches an attack by relocating his knight by playing knight to d4, and then to e6. Both players start sliding their pieces to more active squares, and here we see an interesting exchange. Hikaru attacks the white's rook with his bishop. Magnus decides to capture it with his queen, and in turn, Hikaru captures the knight with his queen. The position clearly favors Magnus, as his pawn is on b5, and cannot be stopped from promoting to a queen. The black's pawn on h5 is undefended, so Magnus goes for rook c5, attacking his pawn. Hikaru defends it with his queen. This allows Magnus to attack the rook on b8 with his queen, forcing Hikaru to move his rook to d8. Magnus goes for a queen on f3, adding another attacker on the h5 pawn. Hikaru pushes his pawn to g6, defending the pawn from further attacks. Magnus seizes the opportunity and slides his passed pawn 1 square forward. This move put Hikaru into deep thought. He moves his rook to b7, blocking the 7th rank. The only consequence of this move was the rook c8 check, and Magnus finds it immediately. Hikaru moves his king to g7, assuming that the king is safe there. But Magnus Carlsen is an endgame god. He jumps in with his queen to c6. The idea behind this move was to force the exchange of pieces. Hikaru slides his king to h6, unaware of the upcoming disaster. After a pawn move, Magnus offers a rook trade by sliding his rook to c7. The idea behind this move was if Hikaru captures his rook, he will capture back with his queen, forcing a trade of queens, after which nothing can stop the pawn on b6 promoting to a queen. But Hikaru is having some different plans. He gives a check with his queen to d5, forcing a queen trade, Now both players have almost equal pieces, except Magnus has a very strong pass pawn on b7. Hikaru slides his rook to b5, controlling the b-file. Magnus pushes his pawn to f4 and Hikaru resigns immediately, shocking everyone. Hikaru's swift resignation left the chess world in disbelief. It was as if he shouted, "Checkmate on my social life, I'm outta here." It seems like Hikaru couldn't handle the Carlsen cruise control and decided to hop off at the next exit. Maybe he saw a magnificent play coming and thought it was better to avoid the impending storm of chess brilliance.